our goal in the first section of understanding decimals is being able to easily convert between decimals and fractions. And something that I'm hoping you're understanding by the end of this video is that decimals and fractions are the same thing. They're both just numbers. If you're working with fractions, you're technically working with a decimal, and vice versa. So as we work through these sections, remember, they're always able to be a fraction or a decimal, and you want to just pick the one that makes more sense to the problem you're currently working on. So as we go to our first section, we're going to do a little bit of place value review, and there's a few things that we want to talk about. First, whenever we look at a number, we want to make sure that we're saying the number's name correctly. Okay, when we're looking at this number, we see in the black spot, we see this is the ones place. Okay, and it has 4 ones. Then if we move past the decimal point, then we're looking at the tenths place. And this has 1/10. And then the second place past the decimal is the hundredths place. And we have 5 hundredths, in 5 in the hundredths place, and then we have a 9 in the thousandths place. And there is a high chance that I'm going to spell that wrong. So if we're looking at this number here, what we have is 4 and 159 thousandths. Okay, so it's really important to make sure that we're saying the number correctly. Just like you did in 4th and 5th grade, it's going to be really important that the number is said correctly. Okay, which is actually interesting because most adults don't actually say the number correctly. So going into the first section is going to be talking about converting our decimals to our fractions. And if you use the names correctly, this process isn't actually that bad. When we look at this number right here, this is the number 5/10. So if we're converting that to a decimal, we simply follow the name and turn it into a fraction. So 5/10 as a fraction, these are the same thing. Now, since we've done fractions already this year, we want to convert this fraction into simplest form. So we're going to divide the numerator and denominator by the number 5 to create 1/2. So that means that the decimal 5/10 is the same thing as the fraction 5/10, which is the same thing as the fraction 1/2. They're all equal. So move now to the next problem. We're going to get a little bit tougher. This number is 62 hundredths. So as we turn that to a fraction, we just simply do 62 hundredths, just like that. And now we have to simplify once again. Now, I see 2 even numbers. So my strategy with even numbers is always to divide by 2 right away. And 62 divided by 2 is 31. 100 divided by 2 is 50. Now 31 is a prime number, which makes 31 and 50 relatively prime to each other, which means that we are done and this is simplified. So the decimal 62 hundredths is the same thing as the fraction 62 hundredths, which is the same as the fraction 31 fiftieths. The final problem, this is about as tough as I would ever expect you to be. This is 155 thousandths. So we write that as our fraction. And since this ends in a 5 and this ends in a 0, we know that they both can be divided by 5. Now 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. But 155 divided by 5, that one I'm going to need some long division for. So I know that 5 times 3 is 15. And we're going to bring down our ones place. So this ends up being 31. Again, that was not done on purpose, actually. We know once again that 31 is prime. So 31 and 200 are relatively prime to each other. So we are done. 155 thousandths is the same thing as 155 thousandths, which is then simplified to 31 200ths. So that is converting decimals to fractions one direction. Now we are going to try to do the opposite direction, which can be a little bit more difficult in certain situations. Now, the first thing we want to know is that if we remember from the names of the decimal place value, the first place after the decimal is called tenths, the second place is hundredth, the third is thousandths, and so on. Which means that if we're dealing with fractions, we want something over 10, or something over 100, or something over 1,000. Because if we have a number like that, if we took this x and we turned it to, let's say, 3, and this was 3/10, we could immediately turn that into the decimal 3/10. And if we took our y down in this problem, we changed this to 42, we would immediately have 42 hundredths. Okay, so when you are working on these problems, decimals to fractions, you'll frequently hear me say, well, what is a benchmark fraction, or what benchmark fraction could we use? So keep that in mind as we work on these problems. We're going to move over here to 2/5. Okay, we want to get 2/5 into tenths, hundredths, or thousandths. That's the easiest way to convert from a fraction to a decimal. Well, I know that if I took 5 times 2, that would give me tenths. So I'd have to do the same thing to the numerator, and this would turn into 4/10. Now, this could be 4/10, or you could do 40 hundredths, or you could do 400 thousandths, and this could go on infinitely. Whoops, not 4,000, 400 thousandths. And this could go on infinitely. You could add zeros to the top and the bottom by multiplying each number by 10 as much as you wanted. But when we write this as a decimal, we are probably going to just write it as 4/10. But you could write 40 hundredths. That would be correct. But 4/10 is going to be the best answer. So as we move down to the next problem, we have 6/25. Okay, so this, we have a couple options here. We could do multiplying each of these by 2 would give us 12 50ths. And if I multiplied by 2 again, that would give me 24 hundredths. Now, I'm hoping some of you saw that and go, well, if I do 25 times 4, if I think about quarters, that would 25 cents times 4 would be $1. 25 times 4 would give me 100 right away. That is also correct, and it doesn't matter how many steps you take. Okay? So in this case, 24 hundredths is the same thing as 6/25. Now, if we did the number 4/8, there is not a number, a whole number, that we can multiply times 8 to turn into tenths or hundredths. We could eventually get to thousandths, and that would be possible, but it would take a long time. So sometimes you can actually divide a number and get to something that you can work with a little bit more tenable. So I'm going to divide both of these by 4 to simplify this down into 1/2. 1/2, we can multiply the numerator and denominator by 5, which gives us 5/10, and bounces us all the way back to our decimal of 5/10. So you can simplify, or you can multiply to make the fraction either larger numbers or smaller numbers, and they both will work. But let's say, hypothetically, we didn't remember that at all, okay? And we were looking at 4/8, and we're like, I can't think of a benchmark fraction. There is a backup that will work, but I only want you to do this on problems where you are totally stuck, okay? We'll get into more detail on why this works as we get into division of decimals, but for this problem, this is 4 divided by 8. That's what this number is, 4 divided by 8. So when I do long division, I can do 4 divided by 8. Remember, it looks backwards. It is not the 8 underneath the division sign. Well, we cannot do 4 divided by 8 without getting a decimal. So what we automatically do is we change 4 into 4, and we could do 0 hundredths. I almost always go to thousandths. So 4 and 0 thousandths. And now we're going to divide just like we always have. We're going to pretend that decimal's not even there. Well, 40 divided by 8, that gives us 5. And then immediately we hit 40 right on the nose. We bring down our first 0. and we bring down our next 0. And so what we end up getting is 4/8 is the same thing as 5/10 or 50/100 or 500 thousandths. So this right here, this is long division. This process, if you're ever stuck, you need to come and talk to me, and we will work through some long division stuff together. But that is only if you cannot find your decimal by using benchmark fractions. Okay, that's a lot of information put into one video. So if you have questions, as always, come and talk to me. We can work on them together.